Scary cases from Unsolved Mysteries. As a kid, Unsolved Mysteries was more terrifying to me than any horror movie I had ever seen. What truly made the show chilling was that all of the featured stories were true, and many dangerous suspects remained at large. Running from 1987 to 2010, the series focused on missing persons cases, unsolved murders and unexplained paranormal phenomena. The show changed hosts throughout the years, but it was the late Robert Stack who made the series what it was in the late 80s and early 90s. Stack's undeniably creepy presence and haunting voice set the mood, and helped to create a sense of uneasiness before the stories were even told. The distinct, eerie theme music with it as a dark scenario was reenacted for the audience, and suddenly the viewer was no longer safe in their own home. The show helped create an atmosphere where everything seemed to be playing out in real time, and it created an overwhelming sense of dread that could drown you in your living room. The following are the creepiest cases to appear on the show. Don Henry and Kevin Ives. In the pre-dawn hours of August 23, 1987, a 6,000-ton cargo train made its regular night run to Little Rock, Arkansas. The train was just over a mile long and was traveling at a speed of 52 miles per hour. The train had been riding smoothly as engineer Stephen Schroyer approached the small town of Bryant, Arkansas. Suddenly, he saw something in his path, but couldn't tell what it was. As the train drew closer, Schroyer made the horrifying discovery that two boys were lying motionless across the railroad tracks. From the time that we had placed the train into an emergency position and laid down on the horn, I would estimate about 3 to 5 seconds to impact. And that may not sound like a very long period of time, but when you're bearing down a couple of children, it's an eternity, honestly. Despite the engineer's frantic emergency stop, the weight of the heavy cargo train carried it for a full half-mile. The boys' bodies were terribly mangled. The two victims were identified as 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives, best friends and popular seniors at Bryant High School. The state medical examiner said the boys had been under the influence of marijuana and he ruled the deaths accidental. Don and Kevin's parents, however, could not accept that ruling. Larry Ives began a crusade to find out what really happened and to salvage the reputation of his son Kevin. Well, I couldn't believe that Kevin was knocked out on marijuana or into any kind of heavy drugs, anything like that, because I was at home a lot during the day, when Kevin come in from school and Linda was here at night and we'd never seen him in a state that he even act like he was spaced out or however you want to phrase it. Kevin and Don were typical teenage boys. They loved to work on their cars. They loved to hunt. Don was a natural comedian and Kevin was his best audience. Most weekends, the two double-dated with their girlfriends. However, on the night of Saturday, August 22, 1987, Kevin and Don met a group of friends at the commuter parking lot, a favorite gathering place for the local teenagers. Around midnight, the two boys left to go back to Don's house. Kevin waited on the porch while Don went inside to talk with his father, Curtis Henry, and he came in at approximately 12:15, and told me where he was going and everything. I told him just to be careful and he took one of my spotlights with him and took his .22. The two boys set off to go spotlighting, a form of night hunting which is illegal in Arkansas. One of them would shine a light in the animal's eyes, transfixing the prey, while the other fired. That night, the boys chose their usual hunting ground, along the railroad tracks that ran behind Don's house. 3 hours later, the train came speeding down Bryant Hill. The boys were lying exactly parallel on the tracks, their arms straight down by their sides. According to the train crew, they were partially covered by a light green tarp. Lying parallel to both of them was Don's .22 caliber rifle. According to Stephen Schroyer, neither boy was moving. I started lying down on the diesel horn. And I got no reaction, none at all, not so much as a flinch. And we just passed over them. What had caused the two boys to lie side by side on the railroad tracks? The state medical examiner concluded they had smoked the equivalent of 20 marijuana cigarettes. He determined that Kevin and Dawn had been in a deep sleep induced by the drug and had never heard the oncoming train. He ruled their death an accident. Dawn and Kevin's parents would not accept the medical examiner's conclusion. Kevin's father Larry hired a private investigator to find out what really happened. Every time he would try to find out something, it seemed like he would meet resistance from different authorities. And we weren't getting anywhere. 5 months after their sons were killed, the boys' parents held a press conference. They hoped to force the authorities to reopen the investigation. The day after their press conference, the investigation was officially reopened. Newly appointed prosecutor Richard Garrett had the boys' bodies exhumed for a second autopsy. The doctor concluded that, together, the boys had smoked, not 20, but between 1 and 3 marijuana cigarettes. He also found evidence that one boy was already dead, and one unconscious, before the train ever hit them. A grand jury reversed the medical examiner's original finding of accidental death and officially ruled the boys' deaths were probable homicides. Prosecutor Garrett then focused on the green tarp reported by the train crew. Neither boy owned one. Garrett wanted to know who had covered them with it, and why. All 4 of the people on the train who were able to observe the scene prior to the accident stated that the boys were partially covered by a green tarp. However, police who searched the scene later denied that engineer Schroyer had even told them about the tarp. According to Schroyer, they even questioned the tarp's existence. That to me would be like questioning the existence of the boys on the track. Because what's real is real and what's not is not. And it was there, as well as the boys. Then, another intriguing lead surfaced. 1 week before the boys were killed, a man wearing military fatigues was spotted near the train tracks. His behavior aroused suspicion. When police officer Danny Allen stopped to question him, the man opened fire. "I got up from the seat. The subject was gone. We searched the area and never found the subject." On the same night Kevin and Dawn died, witnesses again reported seeing a man in military fatigues. This time he was heading down a road less than 200 yards from the spot where the boys' bodies were found. Police, however, were unable to locate him. Update: Don Henry's t-shirt was analyzed by an expert pathologist. Cuts in the fabric indicated that Don was stabbed before the train ran over him. In light of this new evidence, the grand jury changed its ruling from probable homicide to definite homicide. The Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Between 1935 and 1938, a serial killer murdered and dismembered at least 12 victims, only 2 of which were ever positively identified. This killer is officially unidentified, yet researchers of today are quite certain who committed these horrible crimes. During the 1930s, Cleveland was a city on the rise. The population continued to grow and became a melting pot of laborers needed to support our economically powerful steel and manufacturing base. Millionaires' Row was in its heyday. The Great Lakes Exposition and the Republican National Convention were slated for 1936, as were many other conferences and conventions. Despite the effects of the Great Depression, people were beginning to get on their feet again. Against this backdrop of a large city improving economically, one of the most prolific and gruesome serial killers of all time carried out his acts of horror, distracting the citizens of our city from the pride and prosperity of the times. 13 people were brutally murdered over the course of 4 years beginning in 1934, all of them decapitated, most of them while they were still alive. Although Safety Director Elliot Ness claimed to have solved the crimes, no suspect was identified, and no one was brought to trial. The murders ended as abruptly as they had begun. To this day, the Kingsbury Run murders remain one of the most sensational and intriguing unsolved crimes in our nation's history. Kingsbury Run is a prehistoric riverbed running from the flats to about East 90th Street. The train and rapid transit tracks still run through the run. Bordered on the north by Woodland Avenue, and on the south by Broadway Avenue, Kingsbury Run was a dark, dreary and dangerous place in the 1930s. The dispossessed of the Great Depression lived in appalling conditions. trash and filth dominating the makeshift hobo jungle that occupied much of the run. These people, most of them transients, often rode the rails to escape the brutal Cleveland winters or simply to keep moving. The area just to the east of the run was known as the Roaring Third, home to bars, brothels, flop houses and gambling dens. In this grim setting, the most notorious murder case in Cleveland's history would begin to unfold. September 1934, a young man finds the lower half of a woman's torso, thighs still attached, but amputated at the knees, washed up on the shores of Lake Erie just east of Brittenell. Cuyahoga County Coroner A.J. Pierce noted some sort of chemical preservative on the skin which had turned it red, tough and leathery. The subsequent search yielded only a few other body parts. The body was that of a female in her mid-30s. The head was never found. The woman was never identified. She is only referred to as the Lady of the Lake. It wasn't until 2 years later that this find was included in the official killing total and thus became known as victim number 0. It would be another year before the case began officially, and then it would be in another part of the city, the now infamous Kingsbury Run. September 1935, 2 teenage boys discover the decapitated, emasculated corpse of a white male at the base of Jackass Hill where East 49th Street that ends into Kingsbury Run. The body, naked save for a pair of socks, was clean and drained of blood. There were rope burns around both wrists. Coroner Pierce determined the cause of death had been decapitation. Fingerprints identified this victim as Edward Andrassy, a 28-year-old white male. Andrassy had an arrest record, was rumored to be a homosexual, and frequented the Roaring Third. Police discovered a second body nearby, also decapitated and emasculated. It appeared to be covered with the same chemical preservative as the Lady of the Lake. This body apparently had been dead for at least a couple of weeks. The 40-year-old white male was never identified. January 1936, a woman discovers about half the body of a female neatly wrapped in newspaper and packed in 2 half-bushel baskets. The baskets were left alongside the Hart Manufacturing Building on Central Avenue near East 20th Street. Everything except the head was recovered about 10 days later in a vacant lot on nearby Orange Avenue. As in the case of Edward Andrassy, the cause of death had been decapitation. For some reason, however, the killer had waited for rigor mortis to set in before disarticulating the rest of the body. Fingerprints again would allow the identification of one Florence Palillo, waitress, barmaid and prostitute. At the time of her death she resided at East 32nd Street and Carnegie, right on the edge of the Roaring Third. June 1936, early one morning in Kingsbury Run, 2 young boys discovered the head of a white male wrapped in a pair of trousers close to the East 55th Street Bridge. Police found the body of the 20-some-year-old man the next day dumped in front of the Nickel Plate Railroad Police Building. Clean and drained of blood, the corpse was intact except for the head. Pierce again determined the death had been caused by decapitation. In spite of a fresh set of fingerprints and the presence of 6 distinctive tattoos on various parts of the body, police were never able to identify the victim. A plaster reproduction of the man's head, along with the diagram of the kind and location of the tattoos, were made to display at the Great Lakes Exposition of 1936. More than 100,000 people saw the death mask and tattoo chart. The tattooed man was never identified. The original death mask, along with 3 others from the case, are on display at the Cleveland Police Museum. July 1936, a teenage girl came across the decapitated remains of a 40-year-old white male while walking through the woods near Clinton Road and Big Creek on the near west side. The victim had been dead about 2 months and his head, as well as a pile of bloody clothing, was found nearby. Judging by the enormous quantity of blood that had seeped into the ground, this man had apparently been killed where his body was found. September 1936, a transient trips over the upper half of a man's torso while trying to hop a train at East 37th Street and Kingsbury Run. Police searched a nearby pool, which was nothing more than a big open sewer, and found the lower half of the torso and parts of both legs. Police sent a diver in to make the recovery. The number of onlookers that turned out to watch the grim spectacle was estimated at over 600, and the killer may well have been among them. Victim number 6 was in his late 20s and the cause of death, yet again, was decapitation. Coroner Pierce noted that the lack of hesitation marks in the disarticulation of the body indicated a strong, confident killer, very familiar with the human anatomy. The head had been cut off with one bold, clean stroke. The victim died instantly. Identification was never made. 6 brutal killings in 1 year, and the police had neither clues nor suspects. The Cleveland Press, the Cleveland News and the Cleveland Plain Dealer all reported almost daily on the killings and the lack of a suspect. Tension was high. Who was the mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run? Giving into mounting pressure from Mayor Harold Burton, recently appointed Safety Director Elliot Ness gets more involved in the case. Coroner Pierce calls for what the newspapers dub a torso clinic, a meeting of police, the coroner and other experts to discuss information and to profile someone who could be responsible for these gruesome killings. The police department put detectives Peter Mariello and Martin Sulski on the case full-time. They moved deftly through the seedy underworld that constitutes the Run and the Roaring Third, often dressing the part, often on their own time. By the time the case had run its course, the two had interviewed more than 1,500 people, the department as a whole more than 5,000. This would be the biggest police investigation in Cleveland history. The November elections returned Harold Burton as mayor, but Coroner Pierce is replaced by the young Democrat, and now a legendary, Sam Gerber. Gerber's fierce dedication to medicine, along with his degree in law, put him at the forefront of the investigation. February 1937, a man finds the upper half of a woman's torso washed up on shore east of Broadnail. Unlike all previous victims, the cause of death had not been decapitation. This had happened after she was already dead. The lower half of the torso washed ashore 3 months later at about East 30th Street. The woman was in her mid-20s. She was never identified. June 1937, a teenage boy discovered a human skull under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. Next to it was a burlap bag containing the skeletal remains of what turned out to be a petite black woman about 40 years old. Dental work allowed for the unofficial identification of one Rose Wallace of Scoville Avenue. Police followed every lead they had on her, they led nowhere. July 1937, there were labor problems in the flats that summer and the National Guard had been called in to maintain order. A young guardsman standing watch by the West 3rd Street Bridge saw the first piece of victim number 9 in the wake of a passing tugboat. Over the next few days, police recovered the entire body, except for the head, from the waters of the Cuyahoga River. The abdomen had been gutted and the heart ripped out, clearly indicating a new element of viciousness in the killer's approach. The victim was in his mid to late 30s, he was never identified. April 1938, a young laborer on his way to work in the flat saw what he at first thought was a dead fish along the banks of the Cuyahoga River. Closer inspection revealed it to be the lower half of a woman's leg, the first piece of victim number 10. A month later, police pulled 2 burlap bags out of the river containing both parts of the torso and most of the rest of both legs. For the first time, Coroner Gerber detected drugs in the system. Were the drugs used to immobilize the victim, or was she an addict? The answer might come when they found the arms. They never did. She was never identified. August 16, 1938, 3 scrap collectors foraging in a dump site at East 9th and Lakeside found the torso of a woman wrapped in a man's double-breasted blue blazer and then wrapped again in a note quilt. The legs and arms were discovered in a recently constructed makeshift box, wrapped in brown butcher paper and held together with rubber bands. The head had been similarly wrapped. Gerber noted that some of the parts looked as if they had been refrigerated. While searching for more pieces, the police discovered the remains of a second body only yards away. These 2 bodies had been placed in a location that was in plain view from Elliot Ness's office window, almost as if taunting him. Both victims number 11 and number 12 were never identified. August 18, 1938, At 12:40 a.m., Elliot Ness and a group of 35 police officers and detectives raid the hobo jungles of the Run. 11 squad cars, 2 police vans and 3 fire trucks descend on the largest cluster of makeshift shacks where the Cuyahoga River twists behind Public Square. Ness's raiders worked their way south through the Run, eventually gathering up 63 men. At dawn, police and firemen searched the deserted shanties for clues. Then, on orders from Safety Director Ness, the shacks were set on fire and burned to the ground. The press severely criticized Ness for his actions. The public was afraid and frustrated. Critics said the raid would do nothing to solve the murders. They were right, but for whatever reason, they did stop. July 1939, County Sheriff Martin O'Donnell arrested 52-year-old Bohemian bricklayer Frank de Lasalle for the murder of Flo Palillo. De Lasalle had lived with her for a while, and subsequent investigation revealed he had been acquainted with Edward Andrassy and Rose Wallace. His confession turned out to be a bewildering blend of incoherent ramblings and neat, precise details, almost as if he had been coached. Before he could go to trial, de Lasalle was found dead in his cell. The 5'8" de Lasalle had hanged himself from a hook only 5 feet 7 inches off the floor. Gerber's autopsy revealed 6 broken ribs, all of which had been obtained while in the sheriff's custody. To this day no one thinks Frank de Lasalle was the torso killer. The question is, why did Sheriff O'Donnell? The Kingsbury Run murders remain one of the most perplexing cases in our nation's criminal history. Rumors abound as to who may have been the killer. One thing is very clear, Elliot Ness had a suspect who he believed was undoubtedly the killer. This suspect continued to taunt Ness for years after the killings had stopped. All official police records on this case have been lost, destroyed, or removed. The Blind River Killer. On the morning of June 28, 1991, Gord and Jackie McAllister of Lindsay, Ontario, Canada, were the only 2 people in the Blind River, Ontario rest stop. At 12:55 a.m., they were sleeping peacefully when a man identifying himself as a police officer woke them by pounding on their window. He told them they needed to move their RV. When Jackie opened the door, the man barged in and demanded money and valuables. He was armed with a .22 caliber rifle and a .20 gauge shotgun. As Jackie went through her purse, the gunman shot her. Gord was also shot, but he managed to jump out of the vehicle. I rolled underneath the motorhome, and I noticed that another car had driven into the rest area. And this guy had got out and was standing beside the car. 29-year-old Brian Major got back in his car, but there was no escape. The gunman shot him, too, then ran off, and I was lying there, just praying to God that he'd keep on running, and he did. Soon as he went by, I rolled back out and got up into our motorhome and drove out onto the highway. I knew I had to get out onto the highway to get some help. Gordy flagged down a trucker, but it was too late. Gord's wife, Jackie, was already dead. The gunman's other victim, Brian Major, also died at the scene. He left behind a wife and a young son. Gord's injuries were minor. When Ontario papers published a drawing of the gunman based on Gord's description, a witness came forward. He said that a few minutes after 1 a.m. on the night of the murders, a blue van peeled out of the Blind River rest stop and headed straight toward his car. The van continued dead east, toward Sudbury, Ontario. The witness didn't notice if it had Canadian or U.S. plates. Police checked out more than 3,500 blue vans on both sides of the border, but, according to Detective Inspector Frank Ryder of the Ontario Provincial Police, they found no matches. The fortunate situation here is that we do have a survivor. Gord McAllister survived his wounds, and hopefully, he can point out the killer someday. Gordon looked through hundreds of mugshots, but none jumped out. Then, the police turned to computer technology, hoping to improve on the original rough sketch of the killer. Gord helped work on a new drawing. I'll never forget his face. It wasn't a robbery gone bad. There was no resistance to this guy. He just simply was going to kill somebody. for no reason. Gord McAllister described his killer as tall, skinny man with long, stringy blonde hair. Although a killer has never been officially charged for the crimes, authorities believe the suspect to be Ronald Glenn West, a retired Blind River police officer and imprisoned for murdering 2 others in the 1970s. Beverly Mcgowan, chameleon killer. The fisherman's first thought was that someone had dumped a bag of rags halfway down the canal embankment. He went over to have a look. What he found made him recoil and run back to his family sitting in their station wagon down the track. The woman's body he had stumbled across in this isolated spot on the edge of the Florida Everglades was fully clothed, yet its head and hands had been hacked off. The shirt had been pulled up and a section of skin just above the waistline had been cut out. Whoever dumped the body never intended it to be identified. But the murderer had made one mistake. Hidden just under the hem of the corpse's jeans was a small tattoo of a flower. This was enough to identify the body as missing Miami bank clerk Beverly Mcgowan, and detectives eventually picked out a prime suspect, Elaine Parent, the last person to have come into contact with Beverly. Parent took Mcgowan's car to the airport and incriminating forensic evidence was found in it. She also used Mcgowan's credit cards. 8 years on, police admit they are no closer to catching Parent, although investigators have built up an astonishingly detailed portrait of the 55-year-old. They believe she killed Mcgowan simply for her identity. They know she has a dozen aliases and that she has been on the run since 1985 after being implicated in a jewel theft. Parent has divided her time between America and Britain, crisscrossing the Atlantic and changing names when the heat became too much on either side. She has faked her death twice and trawls bars, homeless shelters and graveyards looking for new identities. There are fears he could be living in Britain, and in the past month Scotland Yard has renewed its efforts to find her, visiting several addresses in South London. Leaving that tattoo on Beverly's body has so far proved to be Parent's only mistake in a criminal career, which has seen her successfully evade an international manhunt with sightings reported as far away as South Africa and Australia. Every time she takes on a new name we lose all trace of her, says Special Agent Bob O'Bannon of the U.S. State Department. She's a very cunning woman. It leaves the police worried that Parent may already have struck again or may be responsible for as yet undiscovered murders. The brutality of the Mcgowan murder and the way in which the body was cut up leads me to think that a person capable of committing something like this has already done the same thing in the past or may do so in the future, says Florida detective Nora Walters. For Parent, it was vital that a name should never be put to the corpse in the canal. She intended to do what she does best and what has earned her the sobriquet the Chameleon. She wanted Mcgowan's identity. It soon became apparent that Mcgowan's murder and the events leading up to it displayed a pattern in the way Parent operates. She found her victim by replying to a flat charade Mcgowan put in a local newspaper. Friends say she was enthusiastic about her potential roommate. Parent told her she was an expert in numerology and persuaded her to reveal her social security and bank numbers and her date of birth, enough for her to take on Mcgowan's identity. It was the same method Parent used on the only victim so far to give testimony against her. Charlotte Rae Cowan, a 41-year-old animal welfare worker, met Parent in a bar in Orlando. She had the most sophisticated manner, all with this cut-glass English accent. She was so persuasive. She did the whole numerology thing on me and I even gave her my birth certificate. Cowan now waits nervously for the day when Parent is caught. I'm the reason there's a warrant out for her arrest, so I take good care when I'm walking around town. I'm always looking out for her. Parent leaves few traces, and when detectives combed Mcgowan's flat they found no fingerprints, hairs or fibers which could have placed her there. She's got to be one of the best that I've come across, says Sergeant George Miller, a scene of crime officer with 30 years experience. It tells me that she is very intelligent, meticulous and deadly. But the detectives' luck turned when they performed a series of tests on an apparently blank message pad. They found indented on the sheets a number of overlaid letters, all written by Parent to a British businesswoman. Police refuse to reveal the identity of this businesswoman, saying her life is in danger as she has provided vital evidence to the investigation. Witness X, as she is called, helped fill in some of the blank periods in Parent's life. She says Parent is extremely bright and clever and loves animals but can't work around them because of an allergy. She also has a passionate interest in environmental issues. It emerged that when Parent went on the run in 1985, she fled to England and found a job with a telecommunications company in East London. Her relationship with Witness X began at this point, although she wasted no time in collecting new identities without her lover's knowledge. Around this time, she is thought to have befriended 39-year-old Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson. Little is known about her except that she was born in Lewisham in South London, was the daughter of a lorry driver and married a dairy worker who died in 1985. Just under a year later, Parent applied for a passport in Hodgkinson's name and for the next 5 years assumed her identity. It was Hodgkinson's passport that Parent used to escape from Miami after Beverly Mcgowan was murdered. Public appeals have failed to find Hodgkinson, and detectives fear she could have become another of Parent's victims. "We've been looking so hard for her for so long, you've got to wonder if she'll ever be found," says Special Agent O'Bannon. "She might be able to tell us a lot about Parent, but we just have no idea if she is alive or dead." While she continued to amass new identities, Parent's relationship with Witness X blossomed, only coming to an end when Parent returned from Florida in 1991 after Mcgowan's murder. When the pair split, Parent sent her lover a note written with letters cut from a newspaper, threatening to kill her. Soon afterwards, Parent took out a series of ads in the Lonely Hearts column of London listings magazine Time Out. She described herself as a gourmet cook who loved fine wine and, bizarrely, the proud owner of a fine collection of copper cookware. The last sighting of her was in 1991 when she was arrested sleeping inside a stolen rental car in Miami. She walked out on bail, never to be seen again. If Parent is living somewhere in Britain under an assumed name, the odds are stacked in her favor that she will never be caught. The government says that at a conservative estimate there are 650,000 bogus identities operating inside the benefits system alone. There is no national system in this country to cross-reference birth and death records with the identity documents that anyone may be putting forward. Parent has the system on her side. Perhaps the most baffling part of the case is that as yet no one has been able to establish a motive for her actions. One confirmed murder, the suspicion of others and the multiple identities have gained her more notoriety than money. More worrying for those trying to find Elaine Parent is the idea that even that may not be her real name. Despite years of searching, no one has been able to trace her birth certificate. Angela Hammond. Imagine hearing something happen on the other end of your phone call, and being totally hopeless in the situation. On April 4, 1991, pregnant Angela Hammond stopped to use a payphone at a convenience store parking lot. She was on the phone with her fiancé, Rob Chaffer, when a strange man in a pickup truck began circling the lot. She told her boyfriend that the man had made his way next to the payphone with a flashlight, as though he were looking for something. Then, Chaffer heard his girlfriend's screams through the phone before the line went dead. Chaffer rushed to the convenience store, and as a truck drove past him he heard Andrea screaming his name. He followed the vehicle, but his transmission failed and his car stopped working. Andrea and the man in the pickup truck have never been found, and no one has been charged in her disappearance. Angela's disappearance is similar to the abduction of Elaine Nix in Georgia in 1999. Like Elaine, 20-year-old Angela Marie Hammond was speaking to her boyfriend, Rob, at a payphone at approximately 11:15 p.m. on April 4, 1991 in Clinton, Mo. The payphone she was using was in the parking lot of the Food Barn store, located at Jefferson and 2nd Street, and just 7 blocks from Rob's house. During the conversation, she told Rob that a man pulled up next to her car. He was driving an older Model 2-tone late 1930s green Ford truck with a water or fish scene in the back window. She described the man as being filthy with a beard and mustache, glasses, and wearing overalls. The man got out and looked around his truck with a flashlight. One report said Rob told Angie to ask him if he needed to use the phone, to which he responded that he did not. Moments later, Angela let out a big scream. Rob dropped the phone and immediately headed to where Angela called him from. As he reached the site, he saw the truck she described and heard Angela scream, "Rob!" The truck sped away and Rob followed it. However, his transmission gave out and he was forced to stop after a couple miles. Two witnesses reported seeing this same man and his truck near the telephone booth Angela was using. Angela's car was later found abandoned in the parking lot. Police extensively interviewed Rob and he was ruled out as a suspect. Angela and her kidnapper have never been found. Angela was 4 months pregnant at the time of her abduction. Possible suspects. Some believe that confessed serial killer, Larry Dwayne Hall, abducted and murdered Angela. Police believe he may be responsible for up to 40 murders and disappearances across the country. Hall traveled extensively with the Civil War reenactment group. He was convicted of the murder of Laurie DeBeese in Wisconsin in 1992. He was convicted of the 1993 federal kidnapping of 15-year-old Jessica Roach of Georgetown, Illinois. Another serial killer, Kenneth Macduff, has also been named as being a possible suspect in Angela's kidnapping. In 1990, Macduff was released from prison where he served time for a triple homicide in 1966. He was convicted again in 1992 and sentenced to death for additional murders in Texas. He was executed in 1998. It is unclear if Macduff was in Missouri at the time of Angela's abduction. Similar cases. Police believe Angela's case may be related to that of 30-year-old Cheryl Ann Kenny, a convenience store worker who disappeared on February 27, 1991 from Nevada, Mo, and Trudy Darby, who was abducted at gunpoint from a convenience store in Max Creek, Mo, on January 19, 1991. She was later found murdered. 2 men were convicted of that crime. Cheryl has never been found, nor has anyone been arrested in connection to her kidnapping. There is no evidence linking the 3 cases. Unidentified victim on May 18, 1991 in Brooklyn, NY. The remains of a woman were found in an open grassy area off Seaview Avenue, 200 feet west of Fountain Avenue near Belt Parkway. The woman was about 5 feet 0 inches to 5 feet 2 inches and weighed about 139 pounds. She had long, brown straight hair. The woman was pregnant and had died weeks prior. Cause of death is unknown. Angela was 4'11", 5 feet 0 inches tall and weighed between 120 and 140 pounds. She was also pregnant at the time she went missing. Could this be Angela? Maybe her killer was a trucker and traveled all over the states. We have no idea when or if Angela was murdered. I believe she was killed, but there is no way of telling when this occurred. Her killer could have kept her alive for a few days before killing her. The only difference from this victim and Angela is Angela's hair was curly, not straight. But, you never know. The Connecticut River Valley serial killer. New Hampshire is most famously known for its gorgeous foliage in the fall, but it also holds a dark past. During the 1980s, at least 7 women were murdered along the Connecticut River Valley, which borders New Hampshire and Vermont. Jayne Burrell Ski almost became a part of the tragic history when she encountered a man with a knife in a marketplace on August 6, 1988. Burrell Ski, who was pregnant at the time of the attack, was stabbed 27 times. However, she managed to drive her car to a friend's house for help. All of the other victims died from multiple stab wounds and were discarded on Route 91 in Vermont and New Hampshire. The Connecticut River Valley killer refers to an unidentified serial killer believed responsible for a series of similar knife murders mostly in and around Claremont, New Hampshire, and the Connecticut River Valley, primarily in the 1980s. In the mid-1980s, 3 young women disappeared from the Claremont area. In 1985 and 1986, The skeletal remains of two of the vanished women were recovered within about 1,000 feet of each other in a wooded area in Kellyville, New Hampshire. The condition of the remains made the cause of death difficult to determine, but certain factors pointed to multiple stab wounds. Between the recovery of the first and second bodies, a 36-year-old woman was stabbed to death in a frenzied attack inside her home in Saxtons River, Vermont. 10 days later, the remains of the third missing woman were found. Post-mortem examination revealed evidence of multiple stab wounds. At this point, investigators began examining prior homicides in the area and found two previous cases, in 1978 and 1981, that further reinforced the presence of a burgeoning serial killer. At the peak of the investigation, and after additional homicides and one non-fatal attack, investigators noted similarities in MO, oft-used dump sites, and specific wound patterns that link many of the murders, suggesting a common perpetrator. 7 homicides are commonly cited as being conclusively linked to the Connecticut River Valley killer. On October 24, 1978, 27-year-old Cathy Milliken, born May 25, 1951, was photographing birds at the Chandler Brook Wetland Preserve in New London, New Hampshire. The next day, her body, with at least 29 stab wounds, was found yards away from where she was last seen. On July 25, 1981, 37-year-old University of Vermont student Mary Elizabeth Critchley disappeared while hitchhiking. She was last spotted near Interstate 91 at the Massachusetts-Vermont border, as she had been hitchhiking to Waterbury, Vermont, where she lived with a friend. On August 9, 1981, her body was found in a wooded area off Unity Stage Road in Unity, New Hampshire. Owing to the condition of the body, the medical examiner was unable to determine a cause of death. 16-year-old nurse's aide Bernice Courtmanche was last seen by her boyfriend's mother in Claremont on May 30, 1984. She was thought to have set out to see her boyfriend in Newport by hitchhiking along Route 12. She did not reach her destination and was subsequently reported missing. 2 months later, on July 20, 1984, 27-year-old Ellen Fried, supervising nurse at Valley Regional Hospital, made a late-night stop to use a payphone outside Leo's Market in Claremont. Fried spoke with her sister for approximately an hour when she suddenly remarked on a strange car she'd observed driving back and forth in the vicinity. She stepped away from the phone briefly to make sure her car's engine would start and then returned. After speaking for a few minutes longer, Fried concluded the call. The next day, Fried failed to report to work, and her car was found abandoned on Jarvis Road, a few miles away from Leo's Market. On July 10, 1985, 27-year-old single mother Eva Morse, born May 6, 1958, was seen hitchhiking near the border of Claremont and Charlestown, New Hampshire, on Route 12. This is the last time anyone would see Morse alive, and she too was reported missing. On September 19, 1985, the remains of Ellen Fried were found in a wooded area near the banks of the Sugar River in Kellyville, New Hampshire. Post-mortem examination revealed evidence of multiple stab wounds and probable sexual assault. During the afternoon of April 15, 1986, 36-year-old Linda Moore, born April 20, 1949, was doing yard work outside her home in Saxtons River, Vermont, a short distance from I-91. That evening, her husband returned home to find his wife's dead body, bearing multiple stab wounds. The crime scene suggested a fierce struggle had taken place. Numerous witnesses reported having seen a slightly stocky, dark-haired man with a blue knapsack lingering near Moore's home the day of the murder. The man was thought to be between 20 and 25 years old, clean-shaven, with a somewhat round face, and wearing dark-rimmed glasses. The following year, a composite sketch was released. 4 days after Moore's murder, a fisherman happened upon the remains of Bernice Courtmanche about 1,000 yards from where Ellen Fried's remains had been recovered. Forensic examination uncovered evidence of knife wounds to the neck and an injury to the head. 6 days later, The remains of Eva Morse were found by loggers about 500 feet from where Mary Elizabeth Critchley's body had been discovered in 1981. Post-mortem examination found evidence of knife wounds to Morse's neck. On January 10, 1987, 38-year-old nurse Barbara Agnew was returning from a skiing outing with friends in Stratton, Vermont. That evening, a snowplow driver encountered her green BMW at a northbound I-91 rest stop in Hartford, Vermont. The door was cracked and there was blood on the steering wheel. On March 28, 1987, Agnew's body was found near an apple tree in Heartland. She had been stabbed to death. There was a heavy snowstorm in the area during the night of Agnew's disappearance, and she was a mere 10 miles from her home. Her reasons for pulling into the rest stop have been puzzling to investigators. The killings remained unsolved and had apparently stopped when, late in the evening on August 6, 1988, 22-year-old Jayne Burrell Ski, 7 months pregnant, was returning from a county fair in Keene, New Hampshire, when she stopped at a closed convenience store in West Swansea to purchase cola from a vending machine. Burrell Ski returned to her car and began drinking the beverage when she took notice of a Jeep Wagoneer parked next to her. Via her rearview mirror, Burrell Ski then saw the driver of the vehicle walking around the back of her vehicle. He then approached her open window and asked her if the payphone was working, at which time he immediately grabbed her and pulled her from the vehicle. Burrell Ski struggled, and the man accused her of beating up his girlfriend and asked if she had Massachusetts plates on her car. Burrell Ski responded that she had New Hampshire plates, but this did not deter her attacker, who proceeded to stab her 27 times before driving away and leaving her to die. Burrell Ski managed to return to her car and drive on Route 32 toward a friend's house for help. As she neared the house, she noticed a vehicle driving in front of her and realized that it was her attacker. Burrell Ski finally reached her friend's home, at which the occupants immediately came to her aid. Her attacker apparently performed a U-turn and slowly passed by the house as Burrell Ski was tended to before speeding away into the night. Burrell Ski was treated at the hospital, where it was determined that the attack had resulted in a severed jugular vein, 2 collapsed lungs, a kidney laceration, and severed tendons in her knees and thumb. Fortunately, Burrell Ski's baby survived, although not without complications. Burrell Ski's daughter would later be diagnosed with mild cerebral palsy. Burrell Ski was able to provide authorities with a composite sketch and the first 3 characters of the attacker's license plate. In addition, there was some suspects that were investigated in the case, but there was no official arrest made in terms of announcing the real identity of the River Valley serial killer by local authorities. Even today, the case of the Connecticut River Valley serial killer was still unsolved. Patricia Mian. Accidents are scary enough as it is, but what happened to Patricia Mian after a head-on collision is downright terrifying. It was late April 20, 1989 when Mian's car hit another vehicle on a stretch of highway in Montana. The other driver explained to police that Mian crawled out of her vehicle, stared over at her, and then climbed a fence to proceed into the woods. She has never been seen again. On April 20, 1989, on a dark country road near Circle, Montana, a woman driving on the wrong side of the road almost hit a car head-on. Another driver, Carol Heights, witnessed the near miss, and then was hit by the same car. Carol emerged from the wreckage dazed, but not seriously injured. Then a woman appeared out of the darkness. Carol realized it was the woman who hit her. She just stared. She never said anything, she just stared at me. I will never forget her. The driver of the first car, Peggy Bueller, returned to help and saw the silent woman. As I looked out across the accident, I noticed someone on the other side of the fence, standing there like a spectator, not like it had happened to her. The silent woman walked away from the accident scene and vanished into the night. Police traced the car to its owner, 38-year-old Patricia Mian, and began to search for her. Over the next 5 days, they looked on land and from the air, but found no trace of Patricia. There were 2 theories as to how Patricia left the area. She may have stowed away on a hay truck that was seen about half a mile from the accident. Or, she simply hitched a ride. At least 100 people have reported seeing Patricia Mian since she vanished. Patricia has made no attempt to contact her family or friends. Authorities believe she may be suffering from amnesia. Just before the accident, those who knew her well, including her mother, Dolly Mian, noticed that Patricia seemed depressed and withdrawn. She was, I guess, taking in her own life. What had she accomplished? I think she missed having children because I think she realized she really loved them. After Patricia disappeared, her family found a roll of undeveloped film still in her camera. It contained a haunting self-portrait. Psychologist Don LaPlante speculated on Patricia's mental health. It appears that Patricia was experiencing a very difficult time in her life and was involved in a rather dramatic accident, which may have involved a head injury. The combination of these factors may have caused amnesia. She does not know who she is, has lost memories of the past, and is out searching for herself throughout the country. Patricia was spotted dozens of times between Montana and Seattle, mainly at truck stops. But in every case, she had hitchhiked out of the area by the time authorities arrived. Waitress Barbara confirmed one sighting of Patricia in Bozeman, Montana, in May of 1989, just a few miles from her home. Patty came in the door and wanted to be sat quickly and served quickly. She told me, "I'm in a hurry." And I said, "Well, we do breakfast in 10 minutes. You'll be out very quickly." And then I said to her, "You must have to be back to work at 9? It was about 8:30. She said, "No, I'm just going shopping." I couldn't understand why it was so important for her to be there right at 9 o'clock to go shopping. She was in such a huge hurry. Another waitress, Brenda Clements, also noticed that Patricia was acting strangely. What stood out in my mind was that she seemed really disorientated, and really spacey. I heard her talking to herself. She sat at that table for an hour and a half more just looking out the window, watching people walk by. That's when I walked up to her and asked her, "You okay?" I was wondering if there was anything I could do, because she seemed so lost. I felt like she didn't know where she was or who she was. Although years have passed with no word from Patricia, her father and the rest of her family still hold out hope that she may one day find her way home. More than anything else in the world, I want her back with us. And we would then know that she was safe. Not knowing who she is taking a ride from, that's my biggest worry. I just pray day in and day out that she's with some good people. Over the years there have been reported sightings of Mian in places like Washington, and all over the United States. Her family believes she suffered from psychological issues, or that she had amnesia from the accident, and has been hitchhiking across the country. Sherry Early. 18-year-old Sherry Early's Domino's pizza delivery job was normally an uneventful gig, until the night of July 4, 1982. Early ventured to a remote area in Salem, Oregon to deliver 3 large pizzas, and she was never seen alive again. At the scene, police found Early's Ford Pinto parked with the motor on and the door ajar. The boxes of pizza were on the ground and a footprint was visible across the top of the boxes. Her hat lay just a few feet away, but Early was nowhere to be found. Upon further investigation, police determined the address given with the pizza order was fake, and the unknown caller had given an alias. A Salem murder that puzzled authorities for more than 31 years was officially closed Thursday when a man already in prison for killing 3 other women pleaded guilty to this newest case, the Marion County District Attorney's Office reported. William Scott Smith, 53, in prison for killing 3 women between 1982 and 1984, now has the 1981 murder of Terry Monroe added to his prison jacket. Monroe, 22, was last seen February 1981 when she was with a group of friends at the Museum Tavern. She stepped outside for some fresh air and never returned. Detectives found Monroe's clothing and identification outside the tavern in the Willamette River. Her body was found a month later about a mile down the river. An autopsy showed she'd been asphyxiated. Over time, the case grew cold. In January 2012, the Salem Police Department Cold Case Unit reopened the case and worked closely with detectives and the Marion County District Attorney's Office. Based on evidence and follow-up interviews, the district attorney charged Smith with the case. In August, Smith waived his right to have the case presented to a grand jury. On Thursday, he pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Smith is already in the Oregon State Penitentiary serving life sentences for the 1982 kidnapping and murder of Sherry Melissa Yearly, the 1984 kidnapping and murder of Rebecca Ann Darling, and the April 1984 kidnapping and murder of Catherine Iona Redmond. Her body has never been recovered.